Hello, Neha. How are
Hey,
you today?
Mike. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. So, in some companies and places, New Year's, spring, performance review season, everyone's favorite
Yep.
time of year. So, we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I guess starting from that, like you obviously did an awful lot of that at GitHub. Like, what
Yes, I did.
is it that companies want from their managers generally in performance review season?
Okay, well, yeah, there's like what companies want, there's what I want, and there's what like my reports want. I think companies, honestly, I think they want to check the box. I think in terms of just like making sure that there has been at least a point where like feedback is given. And if anything has been held back and like held on to, it's like a prompt for you to be like, okay, cool. Have I been holding on to feedback a little bit too long? And I should be providing it. I also think that if someone is not doing well and you might be getting to a point where you're like, okay, cool, I don't know if this person is the right fit for the company, then you need to have a track record of feedback given that is documented in some way and it needs to go into that performance review. Well, the performance review is a natural, regular form that is accepted as evidence that someone is like maybe not performing. And I think what's easy or hard about that as a manager, especially if you're new or you're just getting to know someone, is you might be recognizing a few yellow flags that you don't know if they're red flags yet. But if you wait until the second or third data point to be like, oh shit, we have like a trend, you're gonna kick yourself for not documenting it the first time around. But that also means that like if you are documenting feedback on someone and it's like a temporary thing and it's going to get fixed, it feels like risky in a way. And you might be like worried about like, oh, do I really put this on someone's record forever if it's just a temporary thing? The right way to do that is you should be documenting if you're recognizing some things and then like explicitly saying, hey, this is just, I've only noticed this once. It might go away. And then when it goes away, you just documented that it went away. Right. And then you can clear the track record, but you're going to kick yourself if you like, because usually what happens is you find out, especially when I was early on and I like wasn't as experienced as a manager, I'd like be like, oh shit, this has been going on for 9 months and like this is not good anymore and we need to do something about it. And then HR will come back and they'll say, great, well, we need to see a track record of 3 consistent points of feedback with time in between. And you're like, I can't wait another 6 months for this to happen with the team. So anyway, that's like one reason why the company might want it. And also like in general, the company expects you to be working with them on how they progress. The last thing that you want is someone who's doing well that has like no career path and then they leave to go somewhere else because they feel like that's the only prospect they have in growing, right? And so this is an opportunity for you to check in on that career path, make sure that this is what they want, give them an opportunity to say what they want, and so on. What I want is I want to make sure that how a person is thinking about themselves and how others are thinking and how I'm thinking are somewhat aligned. I often get very high performers who are so critical of themselves that they will be honing in on the wrong things. And they'll be like, oh, I should have done this. I should have done this. I should have done this. And I'm like, none of that matters. Actually, this thing mattered. Let's like refocus it or let's talk about why that wasn't on your radar. And I think it's just like a great opportunity for a really good conversation if done right. I think what reports want, I think they want more feedback. I think like generally they want to know if they're doing well. They want to know like, and I think that what is underappreciated and don't always get from their manager is it's always focused on the negative. It's always focused on what you could have done. But like, oh my God, you had an incredible year. Did you know that you grew in these areas? Did you know that you have this secret talent that you didn't know about? And people can actually learn a lot about themselves through both the negative and the positive. But only focusing on the positive is a great way to piss off a high performer because they're going to say, okay, cool, you're just flattering me. And I don't know if I believe any of it. So you have to like find the balance, even if you think the world of someone and you think that they should just keep on going. You have to like dig deeper. You have to think about like their future self. So anyway, that's a very long monologue. From your perspective, what have you observed as like what resonates with people? And also like what do you wish you had gotten more in this? And what do you feel like people don't tell you about what companies want?
Yeah, I feel like what I wish I got more of, like maybe focusing on like my experiences when I was being managed, because that's been the majority of my career. I guess one piece you touched upon before, where it's like, I'm not gonna self-label myself as a high performer, but I never got fired, I guess, when I was at GitHub at least. So I was doing something all right. And I guess I remember having a great manager there. I came to performance review time, and at GitHub, the I still don't understand why really there was the performance process towards the end was you got a rating between 0 and 200, and like 100
Hmm.
was like good. Anything below 100 was not good. Anything above 100 was like very good or whatever. I remember getting like, I don't know, it was a 120 or 140 or whatever. And my manager being like, yeah, like you've done a great job. And I was like, what could I do to, like what could have been better? And they were like, nothing really. And I was like, well, you didn't give me a 200. So unless you give me a 200, there was something, right?
There's something. Yeah.
And you could tell, like, they were the type of person where they were like, "You did a good job. I don't want to like be negative." But as you said, like, I'm the type of person where I want to improve. I want to get better at my job and my craft, whatever it is. And as a result, like, if someone gives me nothing to go with, I'm like, well, you know, like, I should be CEO then, right? Like, come on, like, give me something, right? Even if it's we
Uh,
talked in the past about like unfair feedback, like stuff which
yes.
only in hindsight, even that is kind of more helpful than nothing else, right?
Yeah. Like, this happened. I don't know if there's anything we would have known ahead of time to make it different, but because it didn't have the impact that we wanted, I can't give you more, right?
Yeah. The other experience I had, I guess, on the other end of the scale with not good manager was when I thought I was doing great. Right. This was back when we had people not only do self review at GitHub, but like literally give yourself a rating. It was either exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, not meeting expectations. And it's the only time at GitHub I got not meeting expectations. And I had rated myself as exceeding expectations. And I I felt like I felt terrible, right? Like when I got that review, right? And who knows? We might be able to talk about this later. Like, I think in hindsight, there may have been a bit of thumb being put on the scale where they thought I was doing a good job and their manager thought I wasn't. So the manager overruled the review or
Oh,
whatever. But like, still, like, I think the thing I took away from that I've kind of taken into being a manager is that your review should not be a surprise, right? If someone is either
no.
exceeding or not meeting in particular, like they should not be going into their yearly review and reading that or that meeting or however it's running your company being like, oh, I wonder how I'm going to do. It should be very obvious if you're not doing well because it's like you've been getting that feedback like again and again and again, and it's just not getting addressed, right? But then on the flip side, equally, like, some people are high performers and anxious and whatever, and we can't you can't fix that, but you should be trying your best to be like, you are doing a good job. Well done. Like week
Yeah.
after week in your one-on-ones, right?
I mean, I think that like that kind of expands or where I want to go with this conversation is expands it to like when should you be giving feedback, right? So it's like that mid-year or end of year. I like for it to be a summary. I like to over exceed. So it's like I'll go above and beyond and try to say like, okay, cool. We've talked about all these data points. Here's like a different way to think about it that like maybe we haven't considered before. Same data points, known feedback, different way of thinking. And like that's where I like to like use my creativity instead of like being like, hey, there's new feedback that you never heard before. You should be giving regular feedback, but what does regular feedback mean? I think that, like, obviously, if every single conversation, every single one on one on a weekly basis, we're focusing half of it on feedback, that's like going to be exhausting as well. So, what I like to do is like two things. One is that after every project, we talk about it and we say, like, how did it go? What went well? How's it going? Right. As I get feedback intermittently from other people, I want to relay that and that's like as it's going. And essentially, like if you think about it and you expand that, that's like the life cycle of a project. Your reports are working on projects. At the beginning, you set some goals. You set some like, okay, cool. Like, what's the thing that you're going to push yourself on that you haven't pushed yourself on before? What's the thing that you're afraid of? What's the thing that you definitely want me to give you feedback on as I like hear it? What's something you want me to proactively collect on? Right. That should be a dialogue at the beginning of a project. And we should have check ins as we go for milestones and say, like, okay, cool. Here's this milestone. Here's how I think we're doing. Here's how I think we're not doing. Here's what I'm hearing from other people. Do you want me to collect anything else? And then by the end, it's like, how did it go? And like, depending on how senior an engineer is, right? Like a junior engineer might have 3 or 4 projects within a 6 month period. And so they should have like 3 or 4 at least unique points where we're like, okay, let's talk about how it went. Let's talk about what could be better. So that the end at that mid-year, end of year review, it's a summary. I also like to do another thing. So I started doing this when I was managing managers, which is so now I can't control all the feedback they're getting. I can control the feedback my managers are getting, but now the reports need to get feedback too. And the problem is that like we're as engineering managers, engineering directors, et cetera, you're just like always working, you're working on the project, you're thinking about how the project is going. you're thinking about company politics, you're planning a year ahead of time. It's so hard to sometimes take a step back on each individual career. And so I like to do like a perf review gut check, like at a halfway point or at a quarter point. So, like every quarter between like a review period, I will use my team meeting to be like, okay, cool. Write down all of your reports, write down the rating that you think that they are on track for, and then write down on a scale of 1 to 5 how surprised you think be to hear that. And if they're taking this exercise seriously, it is statistically likely that at least 2 or 3 people would be like, oh, they might be surprised to hear this. Right. And that's because you haven't gone around to it or you plan on getting to it or like you just haven't gotten a second to think about it. My job as someone who's managing managers is to create space for things that don't happen. Right. And so, like, if they haven't had the wherewithal or the time to think about like how these individuals are doing or like feedback that might be held onto, I want to create time and some sort of format to get people to think about it and then act on it. Right.
Yeah, so I guess one of the immediate follow-up questions for me on the managing manager stuff is, and this is something, it's not an experience I've had myself yet, but I've seen it a bunch, and it seems really hard, right? So I'm hoping I don't get it there. But like, how do you handle when there's a big mismatch between if you're managing someone and then they think this person on their team is doing a great job, and you're like, they are not doing a great job, right? Like,
I've
and
had this a
let's
lot.
just yeah, I'm sure. Let's assume, like, for the sake of this argument, that like you're right because like you've had a bunch of feedback from a bunch of other teams and blah blah blah, or an objective measurement, whatever. Like, how do you go about handling those types of conversations?
Yeah. So it's like essentially what's happening is I'm talking to my report. My report's saying they're doing excellent work, and I'm hearing otherwise. And I'm like, you've got this information. I've got this information. We need to reconcile it. And you cannot ignore the fact that I'm hearing otherwise, right? You are not allowed to ignore the fact that I'm hearing otherwise. So either everyone is wrong besides you, or there's something to hear. And sometimes that fits into one on one, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes there has to be multiple sessions where I'm like, okay, look, this is what I'm hearing. If they're like, that's not possible, that's not true, I will go and I'll say, I'll go find people to be like, cool, would you be willing for this manager to talk to you and hear from you directly? And almost prep some people because they're like unwilling to give feedback directly and they'll only give it to me and be like, well, it's not an option. At this point, you need to go say something. And so getting the manager to talk to those people. So I have an example in mind, and I'm trying to think of how much I can redact this or not. But yeah, I had a report who really thought that their report was doing well. I'd heard otherwise. I heard a lot of cases otherwise. That person was just like, "Oh, those are like I heard about that, but I don't think it's a big deal." And I was like, "Well, I do. Now you have to talk to them all." And so I made this person talk to them all. They still came back and they're like, "I heard each individual case, and if you pick apart every case, there's flaws in each one." And I'm like, doesn't matter. The collective impression is that more people don't want to work with this person anymore. And you are now accountable for that impact. And you need, regardless of whether you think that's true or not, these things have happened. And people need to work with this person and people need to be excited about working with this person. So either you can agree with the feedback or you have to figure out how you're going to change this, right? So I try to almost shift it from like, I think some people get really protective over individuals and they're more defensive because it's a feedback against a person. And so I try to shift the problem to a person to like a tangible problem that's like more objective that you can talk about, which is like, okay, cool. Well, do we all agree that people need to be excited to work with this person? Okay, well, that's not true. So now you have to solve that problem, right?
Yeah.
And then ultimately, if they're not giving feedback and I'm seeing that there's a disconnect, then there's a problem with my manager.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's the trickiest time, and I think feel like that's the one that I've seen on various sides a bunch of times, right? Is when you have someone in management where they have maybe it's ruinous empathy, maybe it's conflict avoidance, whatever it may be, and they sort of know there's a problem there, but like they're like, oh, but this person's going to be really upset or really disappointed, or I guess like sometimes there's a bit of a friendship there, and they're like, oh, I don't want to do that to my friend, or also, I guess the flip side, right, where it can sometimes be, I was just, this person's my senior peer. I just became their manager. Like
Yeah.
they've been in this industry a lot longer than I am. Like, who am I to tell them what to do? Like, I think there's all sorts of reasons that can happen, but
Yeah.
I just think it's just so important to give that feedback and get it out there. Like a little experiment I've kind of been doing is whenever I get a new report, I basically try and set expectations literally in our first one-on-one. I'm like, look, what we're gonna do is because it's neither of us are gonna like this particularly, but like I'm gonna try and say something critical every single one-on-one, just so
Mhm.
we'd get in the practice of like knowing what it is. And usually the first one-on-one is just like a safe go-to I have is like you know more about some of this stuff than I do, and you rarely contradict me when I'm wrong.
Mhm.
Please start contradicting me when I'm wrong because you know more than I do. Right? So it can be almost like a sort of backhanded critique when it's like I'm
Yeah.
criticizing myself as much as them, right? But
Yeah.
I think just like getting in that pattern of behavior is really helpful because I
Yeah.
think that's maybe sometimes where it comes from is if like critical feedback is this, you know, break class in case of
Yeah.
emergency thing that you only ever do on rare occasion, then it's like the first time you're going to do it, it's going to be terrifying in every
Yeah.
relationship. But if you just get used to doing it a little bit all the time, then it's like you can have that conversation.
Well, I mean, I think it's because if people are just get really used to that, like the first time that they hear negative feedback, there's a consequence associated with it right away. And like their job might be on the line, right? So it's like if you normalize, hey, I'm going to give you constructive feedback and you can do something about it. And then you actually, your career gets better because you did something about it, because we had time and we're talking about it frequently, then they can have a positive association with negative feedback, right? Or constructive feedback. I also think that, like, sometimes people build up that conversation in their head, and there's just like a lot of prompts you can use to help you kind of phrase it and even think about it to be like, hey, something I'm concerned about is, or something I feel like I've been waiting for more data on is. So it's like, okay, cool. It's not a concern yet, right? Like, this is not like negative feedback. I'm just like, I saw two data points here, and like, I want a third one before I say it's like a thing. You can still tell someone, right? Like, hey, it's just a first data point. So if it's a trend, it's not a good thing. If it's like something that's just like a one time thing, it's not a big deal, right? You can start talking about those things more regularly. So I think as a manager, it's helpful to sometimes have those prompts and then have a way to phrase it so that you don't have to build up the conversation in your head, right?
Yep. Yeah, and my experience has been with high performers often as well. Like you only need to tell them once, right? Like, so if you wait till you've like amassed this portfolio of like, oh, you've been doing this thing every one on one for the last year and I didn't like it, right? Then it's like, well, you wasted like 11 and a half
Yeah,
months where
I
for
could
a
have
lot
fixed
of
it right
people,
away.
exactly,
Why
you could
didn't
have
you
just
just
said,
say something?
exactly, right? And I think that's the other part of it as well. I think you're totally right to like suggest that, there's prompts and ways of doing it and optimum communication styles. But I still think with some of this stuff, it's like, look, if if you can't think of a good way to say it, you probably still are better to say something, even if you have to, you know, apologize for how you phrased it or whatever afterwards,
Yeah.
than not say anything at all, right? Because it's just that when that builds, and you also see in some, again, I've not really seen this directly while I have been a manager, but being friends with enough managers, you see that resentment start to build as well, where sometimes they're like getting really pissed off with someone on their team and that person doesn't even know that they're pissed off
Yeah.
yet, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, you need to get that release out there and like start communicating with that person because it's not fair for them for you to be kind of like building up all of this frustration that they don't even know about and you're not dealing with just because you aren't sure how or don't feel ready or able or whatever it may be.
I think it's like the most annoying phrase to receive and like my favorite phrase to provide, knowing it's going to annoy them. But like, when someone's complaining about someone, your report, your peer, you're like, have you told them? Why are you telling me? It's okay to tell me if you're like using it as a way to process what you want to say and you're like looking for validation as to like whether that's something that is worth mentioning? The answer is like almost always yes, unless like, I don't know, you're kind of coming out of left field and you're not thinking about things correctly. But it's like, okay, cool. Well, like go tell them then. Like go. It's been with me long enough. I want this release from my plate. Like go tell them. And as an individual, you can catch yourself if you're ranting about someone. And then any peer, any IC also gets this, right? You get someone who's like ranting to you about someone else. And like the question should be, have you told them? Or if you want to be more open, what have you told them so far, right? How is it going when you give them this feedback? Oh, I haven't said anything. Sounds like we should do something about that, right? Um,
Yeah, I remember another funny GitHub interaction is, perhaps being like British and dealing with Americans or whatever. Like I remember one time saying, like getting someone to read some message and say, do I seem too mad in this message? And they read it and they said, you don't seem mad at all. And you clearly are very mad. So like you should probably make your
maybe.
message maybe sound a bit more mad because this person is going to read this and think that like there's absolutely no problem here. And there is clearly a problem here because
Yeah.
you're very upset, right? Like
Yeah.
I think that's the part of it as well. And I think, you know, it's maybe it could almost be its entire own podcast about ranting or venting or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think being on either side of that, I think it's tricky because there's definitely times where you need to catch yourself or help catch the other person and be like, look, is this helping? Are you making a plan right now?
That's right.
Or are you just speaking to someone about this who is not going to push back because they agree? And that makes you feel like you've sort of dealt with the problem, but you haven't. You're just,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, preaching to the choir and they already agree with you. And you actually probably need to like suck it up a little and go and have the difficult conversation with the person who's not going to receive it, like me being like, oh yeah, I hate them too. Yeah, like, and by all means, get your friends or peers or manager or whoever or people you respect or people mentoring you to help you figure out how to have that conversation. But like, that's not a replacement for having the conversation.
Yeah. 100%. And I think like I've also seen leaders get upset that people are talking about things in private channels or in secluded spaces. I want to differentiate between like people need safe spaces to process feelings. Um, the ownership is that on an individual basis, if you're going to distract everyone with your feelings, you now have the responsibility of helping people get back to their jobs after they had to listen to you rant about something, right? So, what is you just said this, right? Like, what's the point? Is the point that you're like trying to get validation to see whether this is like worth saying something about? Is the purpose that you are still trying to articulate why you're feeling and you're someone who processes out loud? Or are you just interested in distracting everyone with your feelings, right? Like if it's not one of the first two, or I'm sure there's a few other reasons that I can't think of, then it's like it's distracting. And then on the other side, as a friend who's listening to someone rant, like no one wants to solve right away, right? Rude, right? Like you have to be like, that sucks. But then if you have someone who's consistently not doing anything about it, you're just stuck in that position forever. And like, uh, maybe you're okay with that, but like that person needs to go do something about it. And like, if you're a real friend, then you're going to be like, okay, cool, ready for you as you process these emotions out loud. But I want to make sure you're doing something about it. And you got to help them out of their comfort zone, right?
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's the thing. And sometimes there's situations where either they can't do anything about it or they've done it. They've delivered the
Yeah.
feedback to the
They have.
person. That person's on a pip or that person's getting a negative performance review in 3 months or whatever, right? And then sometimes it's helping the other person or yourself. And sometimes like, it could be a report as well. In those times being like, I'm here for this is a very frustrating situation, but us talking about it for 30 minutes every week is making you feel worse. It's not making you feel
Yeah.
better.
It's
And you're
revving you
sort of
up.
just, you're picking the scab like every week. And maybe you need to just move on and wait for the next step and put this on pause for 3 months until there's something we can actually do about it. And then we can like revisit. But for now, you're just upsetting yourself, right? And as you say,
Yeah.
often upsetting other people, the team, whoever you're talking to, right?
Yeah, and, like, there's exceptions to every rule, and, like, these are all just we're speaking from experience that we've been in these situations before. I'm probably on both sides, right? And so it's like there are cases where this is totally true. Um, Something else I was thinking about when it comes to doing reviews, like, why do we even do reviews in the first place, right? Like, for me, I don't necessarily, sometimes these reviews have like 8 to 15 questions that you have to answer. And like, I ain't about that. Every company has their own process and they have like a way that they like to do things. But I really like to boil it down to just a few things, which is like, what are 3 things that you did in the last period that you're really proud of that like maybe you didn't think you could do and you did? And like, tell me about those things, right? not 3 things that went well. Because some of those things are in your wheelhouse and, like, love that for you, but, like, what about pushing yourself? What are 3 things that you thought were gonna go fine and didn't go? And, like, you wanna own that and you wanna begin a conversation around it, and then, like, what do you wanna push yourself on? And, like, that, I think I wanna hear that from my reports, and I think that my reports owe it to me to hear what I was surprised by. Positively surprised, not positively surprised, negatively surprised, right? And, like, where I want them to push themselves, right? And be like, "Hey, every 2 months, every 3 months, every 6 months, you should be doing something risky, and you should be trying something, and if we agree on what you try on, then I can help mitigate that risk for you. And I can make it a safe space for you to try that. And then we can agree on something, and then you're growing and you're trying something. And as your manager, if I'm actually thinking about where you could grow into and how you could be, there's like 1,000 paths. So I want to make sure that out of my box and out of your box, we pick one that like is mutual and we're like, okay, cool, we agree on this one. This is both something that we want. We both like see the potential of this. Let's like try it out together. And I feel like that's so much better of a conversation than like, "Well, you did this and it didn't go well." Like, I kinda wanna skip past some of that and talk about what was surprising. And I really do wanna hear about people, like, what comes to mind when you think, "Oh, I could have done this better," right? And, like, some of those things, as I said earlier in the conversation, are not a big deal, and I, like, want them to focus on the things that matter, right?
Yep, 100%. I think that's a nice summary to finish with. Well, thank you, Neha. Like, I feel like I've imparted a huge amount of your wisdom this time. But yeah,
And good luck to everyone else who's working on reviews, an arduous process. We didn't even talk about collecting feedback and the importance of that, but like good luck. And, the next period will come again. So you always get another chance.
hell yeah to that. See you again soon. Bye.
Bye.